Here we go.
Dr. Elizabeth Congdon is an associate professor at Bethune-Cookman University, a historically Black university in Daytona Beach, Florida. She is the founder and president of BEC Research, Inc., a nonprofit dedicated to the increasing diversity in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, through research and education. Dr. Congdon received her doctorate in ecology from the University of Missouri, St. Louis in 2007, with research conducted in Venezuela on behavior and conservation of capybaras, the world's largest species of rodent. Since 2018, Dr. Congdon has shifted focus from field research to applied behavior dedicated to increasing health and wellness of shelter dogs. Her ultimate goal is to increase adoption rates in difficult to adopt dogs through database enrichment strategies. Dr. Congdon's presentation will explain how a toy was designed to help anxious and nervous dogs manage their stress, to develop a calmer demeanor, and have a better chance of getting adopted. Dr. Congdon will summarize research results into therapeutic play and discuss how programs can be developed and maintained in shelters through volunteers. Please welcome Dr. Elizabeth Congdon.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for being here early in the morning. Can everybody hear me okay back in the back? Great. Okay, so as mentioned, I'll be talking about multi-sensory enrichment, and the way I measured stress was through salivary cortisol. So when I'm talking about cortisol, it's always from saliva. So she already introduced me, but yeah, behavioral ecology, natal dispersal is my specialty with tropical mammals. Natal dispersal is when the young ones grow up, whether or not they leave home. As promised, pictures of capybaras. So these are photos that I took when I was in the field. The first one, that baby's probably just a couple days old. Second one, spent a lot of time in the water, and when they come out, they sometimes drag the plants with them, and I thought he looked like he was ready for carnival, so I just loved that picture. My research partner is Dr. Jessica Owens. Her doctorate is in psychology, so we kind of come at things from two different directions. She specializes in communication of socially complex animals, which is why she's carrying some techie equipment there. She's worked with birds, wolves, and for the last 6 years has been developing her training business near Daytona Beach, Florida, called Unleashed Training. She unfortunately cannot be here this week, but I do have her business cards if anyone's interested in speaking with her. And here's our motivation, here's our babies. We had to put a picture in of the babies. The white one's mine, and then that's Jessica with two of her. Okay. So, as mentioned, I do work in shelters and humane societies, and basically we all know this story, right? The current overpopulation crisis, and exacerbated by the pandemic, people going out and getting dogs when they were home, and then now they can't keep them, and that leads to a lot of times euthanasia. I should say euthanasia due to space and or behavior euthanasia, because those difficult to adopt dogs, they just have too many of them with behavior problems and not enough staff to work with them. And while of course no two shelters are alike, most of all of them are under-resourced, understaffed, and there's really no one standard objective behavioral assessment. A lot of people have the one they use, the one that's their favorite, but in terms of being able to discuss across the line, how do we assess which dogs have behavioral issues and what kind of issues, I looked. Now the shelter that I worked at, Halifax Humane Society, looks like this. And hopefully you can see that what we have is a long aisle of 60 dogs, 30 on each side, and they can see each other directly. And so that can be just, it's stressful. And the public is allowed during the day to just walk around at will. So the challenge we have here is, of course, we have stressed dogs. And stressed dogs might not present well to potential adopters. And this has been shown with some previous studies. And they get that stress causes a chronic cortisol exposure. Cortisol is the stress hormone, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a minute, that can affect health and wellness. And these behavioral effects then that are causing discomfort in the dog then exacerbates that not presenting well to adopters. And here's an example of how wait, bark warning, forgot to do bark warning, bark warning. Ah, hang on. Whenever they walk a dog, they have to walk it past all the others. So the volunteers are routinely taking dogs past all the other dogs, riling them all up. And it's just the way the shelter is set up. It's difficult. Okay, so let's talk about cortisol and why it matters. All right, the HPA axis is the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenals. So hypothalamus and pituitary in your brain, the hypothalamus is the brain part, the pituitary is the hormone part, and then the adrenals are the hormone glands that sit right on top of your kidneys. So when you have a stress encounter, the hypothalamus in the brain tells the pituitary to release hormones. That tells the adrenal glands to release hormones. Those hormones are adrenaline and cortisol. So both adrenaline and cortisol then lead to that fight or flight. So this is an evolutionary process. This is a good thing if you are trying to escape a predator. You want your heart rate to go up. You want your body to say, you want your body to say, you know what, right now, digestion's not so important. Let's focus on getting the heart rate up so that we can run away from this tiger. But if that's chronic, you can imagine it affects digestion, which is going to affect the health, which is going to affect everything else. Then in addition, cortisol suppresses the immune system. So if you have chronic cortisol, you've got this immune system suppression that obviously can just wreak havoc. So in humans, if you've heard of chronic fatigue syndrome, it's the elevated cortisol over long periods of time. So that immune system problem can be significant. Now, I say here that the goal was to improve resiliency. I just learned what the resiliency rainbow is yesterday at one of the talks at this conference. Oh. I am not a dog trainer by training, and so I'm still learning the literature. But as I listened to that talk, I was like, hey, it's kind of what we're doing, right? So I'm reading all about the resiliency rainbow, and now I love Patricia McConnell too. So it's been, and this conference has been just great for that. So while we're improving health and wellness, I'm thinking about this, okay, improving resiliency contributes to this. Then they could present better, hopefully, to adopters, maybe have a higher rate of adoption, at least live a better life. Mm-hmm. And I want to, therefore, create strategies based on data, not anecdotes and personal experience. We all have the anecdotes, we all have the experience. But if we're going to funders and say this is what we need for our shelter, they want to see data. So let me know if you need data. So enrichment in shelters. There have been some previous studies done that human interaction, kind of regardless of what kind of interaction, does lower cortisol. Right? So in these studies, there wasn't like a standard interaction that was tested. It was like, oh, sometimes it's because they're going to get groomed, they may be going for a walk with volunteers, but it's out there. But controlled experiments are difficult. That's why there's not a standard interaction. No two dogs have the same background. Often it's unknown, so that messes with our data a little bit. The dogs get adopted before your data collection is over. That happens quite a bit. Or you just have demonic possession of predictable schedules. I work in Daytona Beach. Hurricanes. I had to do the cortisol study twice, because the first set of cortisol samples defrosted during Hurricane Ian, and so we had to redo it. Excellent lesson for my students, kind of a bummer. But this all got started. How I went from being a field researcher to applied is that at an Animal Behavior Society meeting back in 2018, I met Mary Beth Evans. She's an occupational therapist specializing in neurorehabilitation and its relationship to motor control behavior in humans. But she's also a dog lover. So she created a toy. At that time, it was called Therapet, and it looked something like this. And this was for nervous and anxious pets, not intended for aggressive or dangerous dogs. This is for people in the home to use if their beloved was having some issues. So when I met her, I said, you know who's nervous and anxious? Shelter dogs. And she agreed to donate toys to me and my students so that we could take them to the local shelter and see if it worked. So this neuroscience perspective that she brings, we started talking about, well, her perspective, and then she talking about it. We have these distal functional senses, right? Olfactory, auditory, visual. And you'll notice that her toys are either black or white because the dogs don't care what color the toy is. If the toy is bright red, that's so that you like it, right? But then these proximal and functional senses of the tactile, the proprioceptive, the vestibular, proprioceptive being that body position, right? Being able to pounce and play and roll over and grab the toy, and of course vestibular being balance. You know, when you get that head shake, you don't want to fall over. Right, so this particular toy kind of taps into those as well. What we found with our first pilot study, the red bars, are showing that when we controlled the therapeutic to your standard rope toy, right, the knotted rope, right, the dogs were more engaged with the therapeutic. They loved it. They're like, yeah, another rope toy. Ooh, this one, right? And I'll talk about the design of it a little bit more in a couple minutes. And they also displayed more ownership behaviors. What I mean by that is the rope toys were played with by all the dogs, right? They smelled like the other dogs. Each dog had their own therapeutic toy. And they would take that and they would try to bury it. They would guard it, resource guarding, right? Of course they resource guard. They're shelter dogs who just got a new toy and they get to keep it, and it smells like them when they, come back the next time, right? But we took that as a measure of, they really like this thing. And they also really like to chew it up. So it had a felt coating to it, which is fine if you're at home with your pet and can interrupt them, but sometimes the shelter dogs would not let me interrupt them, and whoo, shredded it. What's beautiful about the therapeutic company is they said, okay, well, let's try something else for these guys. And so in 2020, and this was presented at the Society for Integrative and Comparative Biology Conference in 2020, basically covered it with like a thick fire hose type material. Unfortunately, with the fire hose type material, it wasn't as flimsy, it wasn't as floppy, right? So when they shook it, they didn't get that same feedback. And so I would give some of them the softer one again. What you see there on the my left is Bishop being walked with the toy in his mouth, because I was not taking that thing away from him until he got back to his kennel and treated for an exchange. He was like, nope, I'm now. So we kept thinking about, okay, how can we do this? So the redesign. It's now called the Calmer Dog Toy, and you may have seen it out at the vendor table, and it's floppy, so when they shake, they get that, and then it's weighted, so it feels, well, it's tapping into that kind of like, ooh, this is something meaningful, right? You can feel it's got a nice texture, it's got this thick nylon. You'll have to ask Mary Beth exactly what the material is, but I have no idea. But, so it's got the texture, they can kind of get their teeth into it, but it's durable enough, they can't rip it up too easily. And so the Calmer Dog design has lasted. It's filled with crushed walnut shells, only the shells, and they've been rinsed, so we don't have to worry about allergies to the guardian. And so it was at this point that Dr. Owens came on board. And Dr. Owens has been training dogs for 20 years. And so she worked with us to work on that interactive play, but also start working more with positive reinforcement. So now we've got a toy that's flexible, it's durable, it has that texture. The dogs each get their own, so their own scent design and nobody else's, and then it's also weighted. Now the only thing it doesn't have is a squeaky. Because if you put a pocket for a squeaky, dog can get the squeaky out, and then you have a ruined toy. There just wasn't a good way to put a squeaky in there. So everybody has a squeaky that their dog's ripped out, keep it in your back pocket, now you got a squeaky. So this is a couple of our dogs, Bailey and Lincoln, playing with it. They just had balls. Some of the dogs had to be taught how to play with it a little bit, because maybe they've never even had a toy before, but once they get going, they love it. Now, okay, warning, this is a rough video, but I'm gonna show you before and after of one of our dogs, Shadow. I love Shadow. I love Shadow now. I used to call her a little effer. That's Dr. Owens.
Wow.
With her arm in Shadow's mouth. This is me after Dr. Owens played with Shadow for 5 days. And then I went in with the basic rope toy to do a little comparison. See how good Shadow is? After only 5 days. So improved self-modulation or self-regulation. Basically, she's not like so crazy anymore. At first, it was so difficult to put a leash on her. By the end, I would just go into her kennel and sit with her for 10 minutes, and she would just sit with me. Because she became one of my favorite. She has been adopted. So, question?
No, it's so cute.
Oh, I know, right? I know. Shadow was awesome. I freaking love him. This actually is Festus. He's also been adopted. So what we've got here is a combination of the interactive play with a high-value toy and that positive reinforcement. It requires proper training, both the human and the dog, right? So you have to have people doing this who know how to not push the resource guarding, right? So this is one of our challenges, is training to expand this to volunteers. Volunteers need to know how to not push it, right? How to play with this. But some people look at resource guarding as, oh, danger, danger. That means this is a dangerous dog. I disagree insofar as this is a shelter dog who lives in his kennel 23 and a half hours a day, possibly 24 hours a day, and he just got a new toy. Let's see how long that resource guarding lasts and how bad it is. So then the question becomes, okay, are we really reducing stress? And of course, I'm a biologist, so I want to measure something more tangible, right? So we've got behavioral data. Each one of these pilot studies was giving us similar behavioral data as that first one. Now I wanted to add cortisol. So first we started with behavioral observations with the rope toy as a control, and then with calmer dogs. So the rope toy dogs and the calmer dog toys, dogs were two different sets, right? And they were all blockhead dogs. They had all been labeled behavior dogs by the staff, but they were not dangerous. Because I had students working with me too. The students would leash the dog, bring it out to the play area, and then I did the play. This was a common familiar play area with available shade and water. Again, this was on Florida. But it was away from, separated from the other play areas so that we didn't have dogs constantly walking by. We played once per day in the early morning for 10 minutes for the pilot studies. For the cortisol study, we played every other day for two reasons. I wanted to increase sample size, and I can only play with so many dogs before it gets too hot, and I get exhausted. And no shelter's gonna be able to play with the dog every day. They don't have the time. So maybe every other day is more reasonable. So will this still have a positive effect? And we did instantaneous focal animal sampling, which basically just means that we watched one dog at a time, and every 10 seconds, we wrote down what they were doing, what their behavior was. And that's how we can get a numerical measure of their behavior. So this started in the summer of 22. So we have behavior from that. Then we redid the cortisol study over winter break, 22, 23. My students were awesome about this. And so we did the rope versus calmer, similar results with the engagement and ownership. I'm working on combining all the years to get an even, larger sample size, but that's not done yet. And then we've got the before and after the calmer dog toy, and we saw that reduction in anxiety-driven behaviors. So this is the graph that was created by my student, so it's in weird colors. And she analyzed the odd bay dogs and the even bay dogs separately. I tried so many times to tell her she could put them together and that's okay. But I wanted to show this because like this is, students are doing this. Students are working on this. And we teach statistics. And these differences are statistically significant with the exception of the second graph, the orange line. That's the only one that's not statistically significant. It just shows a trend. But what we saw was a reduction in nipping. So basically when the dogs, whenever I turned my back, some of them were, well, shadow. That wasn't nipping. Most of them weren't shadow, right? But you know, just nipping at my, like, don't turn away from me, trying to get my attention, jumping on me instead of waiting for me to throw the toy for them. Those behaviors reduced. Then we did the cortisol. We're done, just so excited. It worked. So this was, we collected saliva every day before playing with the dogs. And so the top graph, you can see that shows that p-value was 0.12. What that tells us is that this mean difference, this average difference between the dogs, it's trending towards being a significant difference, but it's not quite there. In most scientific studies, you want a p-value of 0.05 or less. In behavior, we sometimes take a 0.1 because behavior is so difficult and tricky to measure. So that was a 0.12. But when we looked at, instead of the individual dogs before and after, when we looked at daily and averaged all the dogs together, we did get a significant difference using a one-way ANOVA. And what you see in red is the days we played with them. What you see in yellow are 3 days after we stopped playing with them. Because that was Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and the day after Christmas, and I didn't ask my students to do that. They did that myself. So that was just so exciting to me. I would have been happy if we could have kept their cortisol down for 24 hours. And we've got it lowered for 3 days. Yay. What about the dogs who really can't go out and play as much? So we had some dogs that were heartworm positive. And so they couldn't be outside running around. We wanted to do something for them. So the therapeutic company also created the settle strap, also for sale in the vendor area. Settle strap is a strap. It closes with Velcro, flexible, basically using that tactile pressure, right? Like T-touch. We use it for 20 minutes a day, 5 to 6 days, and you see Sahara here, just like, oh yeah, cool, calm. Right? She's a big sleeper. What was great about it was easier to put on the dog than say a thunder shirt. Thunder shirts are wonderful products and they work, they work, but this is a minimalist design, right? And again, we were working with all the blockhead dogs. So not something that would have been easy for the students to get something more on. So this settle strap was great. And I gotta tell you, I was skeptical. But Ms. Evans was right. We didn't see a pattern of behavioral change because some of the dogs got adopted midway, and the other ones, they're also individual. They all started at different places with their behavior, so couldn't really say anything generalized. However, the cortisol measurement before and after, we did see a significant difference. This is each individual dog. Of course, the statistics are done on the whole group, and this was the cortisol measured before we started and 2 days after we stopped using it. The last day of using the settle strap, the dogs were amped up by some noise that was going on in the shelter and we couldn't get enough saliva. But I then got it, Christmas Day and the day after, and so we were able to show it. So the settle strap also brought their cortisol down. So punchline number one, even short-term enrichment can have a significant impact on reducing physiological stress in shelter dogs. And the Calmer Dog toy is a highly attractive toy and particularly effective for enrichment. The settle strap is an effective tool for relieving stress with a minimalist approach. In addition to that, I had another student who worked at another shelter and looked at socialization and decompression. Basically, this animal shelter has a break room, the couch. And he would take the dogs into the break room. So the first day, observations with a stranger, me. And we used dogs that were recommended by the staff that were not particularly social with people. And they were not interested in me. They just wandered on the play yard. I would try to call them over. They're like, no, people aren't excited. They weren't aggressive, but they just weren't interested. Then days 2 through 7, my student would go in. The dogs had been outside already, had done their thing, had done their play. This was mid-afternoon, and he would take them into the break room and just have quiet time with the dogs. There was a couch. He would have treats with them, but just calm attention, no toys. And they would get to get up on the couch and just hang out with him. And then on day 8, we went back and looked at the observations with strangers, new strangers, not me, other students. We used other students as stranger bait.
It's fine.
Yeah, you know, it's fine. Yeah. I'm gonna just grab my glasses real quick. Okay. So first, tail wagging. We were like, all right, are they just kind of more excited, less excited? There was no significant difference in the tail wagging averages. But when you look at licking behavior, basically giving kisses, I didn't get any. But 2 other students, and I'm in blue, orange is student 1, gray is student 2. Student 1 and 2 were done on the same day. They got kisses. Pacing around in the play area. With me, there was more pacing. With the other 2 students, they weren't pacing as much because they were more interested in the people. So you can see the interest level, approaching, orienting towards, soliciting attention. Those were significantly increased. So punchline number 2, with practice, socialization, and decompression, maybe we can help these dogs get adopted because they're more interested in people. Previous studies have shown if the dog is in the kennel, just kind of facing the other way, they're less likely to be adopted. So we haven't got these numbers yet, but that's our hope. The other thing is that not all volunteers need to be walking or playing with the dogs. As long as dogs are still being walked and getting their outside time, maybe you have some volunteers that are not as physically able-bodied. They could hang out in the break room with the dogs and still have a positive impact, be a part of the shelter, feel engaged with the shelter, and then hopefully donate to the shelter, as well as helping the dogs. So yesterday when I was listening to the talk on resiliency and the 7 domains of the resiliency rainbow, I was thinking about each one and whether or not we were having an impact on those things. And I think there's a possibility, so this is the next study, testing these things specifically, but I think there's a possibility that we're really, if we could get all these things, play with the Palmer toy, settle strap, when we know there's a storm coming or something, or on those dogs that can't play, quiet time with volunteers, we can affect decompression, we can get that to play, get the stress cycle completed, improve mental and physical well-being because we're bringing down those cortisol levels. We can have predictability because when the dogs see me, they know they're about to play. Social support in terms of the quiet time and with the play. If the dog didn't want to play, I didn't force it. Right? If the dog wanted to just sit on my lap, the dog could just sit on my lap. Right? And then agency. Right? It's the dog's choice. So my long-term goals here, of course, are to reduce stress and anxiety, negative excitement, to improve the overall health and quality of life for the shelter dogs, and thereby hopefully decreasing the length of stay and increasing successful placement in their forever homes. And expanding volunteer training to establish this continued enrichment at both these and other shelters. That's a big ask, right? So young people in the room, this is gonna be you because I'm getting old. Now, of course, there's significant challenges with this, and the major one being there are so many dogs, and people are still breeding them without necessarily knowing what they're doing. I mean, just before I left for the conference, there was a piece of paper stuck to a telephone pole, AKC German Shepherds for sale. Dude, if you've got AKC German Shepherds, you don't need to advertise on a telephone pole.
Yep.
Right? You've got a waiting list.
Yeah.
You know?
Self-regulate.
So egos, right? One of the first shelter I started working with, I'm not allowed back in because I disagreed with their administration. Now, to be fair, I didn't just disagree. I wrote a letter to the chairman of the board and the CEO. The very next day, the MOU between my university and the shelter was discontinued. I'm not even allowed to volunteer there anymore. So we have to be willing, all of us, to not only check our own egos, but to be mindful of other people in how we approach them. Now, I feel like my letter was pretty gentle, and I said nothing publicly until they kicked me out. But this is something like, if we want to help the dogs, we're going to need to maybe be a little bit nicer than we want to be. And of course, volunteer numbers and training. Getting enough volunteers and then getting them trained appropriately, and we all know. The other thing that I'm sort of amazed is the lack of oversight. So I started out working in zoos and with, in the field. So I was highly oversaw. So a lot of oversight. There's the American Zoological Association that accredits zoos. There's the USDA that regulates any research that you do with any live animal. Even if you're only doing observations, you can't do it until the USDA says you can, right? But anybody can have a rescue. The rescues that are represented here are some of the best I've seen, what I know of. So I'd love to, win the lottery and create that organization. So we need a plan. We need a plan going forward that addresses both the large numbers in the shelter today, as well as the number of dogs that are being bred. Now, I'm not talking about the licensed breeders who are doing dogs that they have a waiting list, and those dogs we know are going to go into front. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the backyard breeders that are putting out doodles at a ridiculous rate.
What?
Labradoodles, real breed, can be an awesome dog. Random doodle created by random guy, or woman, don't want to. So what I'd like to do during the question and answer period in particular, I will of course answer any questions you have, but also if you've got some ideas, some brainstorming, this is being recorded, and I will do what I can with those ideas. So first I need to acknowledge my collaborators. Mary Beth Evans is sitting up front here, and you can find her in the vendor hall with Palmer Dog Toys. And so thank you so much for creating a toy that has helped so many dogs. It's just awesome. Halifax Humane Society is where I started, particularly Marcia Helm, who has a master's in anthrozoology and was the animal care and behavior specialist. Unfortunately, she has moved out west. The Edgewater Animal Shelter management staff and dogs, that's who I'm working with now. Deuce, who was so confused by not getting any of the toys that were in a big box on my back porch. He was so confused. Mon bébé. And of course, the dogs. Is there anything cuter than a dog rolling around in a kiddie pool? I mean, really. And so, if you have any questions or ideas, I believe we are so on time. We are. Yay. And so we'll get a microphone to you, and just raise your hand and anybody. I did such a great presentation, there are no questions. Way back in the back.
Oh, wait. Hang on.
Oh, the disagreement with Halifax? So When the new management took over from the previous CEO and COO, they have a more relaxed definition of when behavioral euthanasia is appropriate. They appear to have a breed bias against pit bulls and for German Shepherds. And so, for instance, the letter that I wrote was because there was a German Shepherd that was about to be adopted out that did have a bite history, but there was a little pitty mix that I personally worked with that had no bite history that was on death row. That little pitty mix was moved to another shelter and has been adopted. Because we kind of did a whole social media thing that put pressure on them. And then they either fired or drove out the entire behavior staff. They no longer have a behavior team. The COO believes that she can personally train the animal care staff to do the behavior assessments. Because I'm no longer there, I do not know if that program is being effective. I know that program has been effective at other shelters. I do not know what the experience or training of the COO is, except that there are no letters after her name, and she was previously an animal control officer. I think that's where that German Shepherd bias comes in. So, I'm in a position now where I don't really know enough to say how it's going. Maybe she's great and everybody's being trained and it's going much better, but the dogs that I had personally worked with that had been put down for behavior euthanasia when I knew that they weren't dangerous, that's kind of what set me off.
Dr. Cone, do you want the lights to come up just because we're doing some photos?
Oh, sure, that's
and
fine.
And also, because I'm in the back here, I can barely see you.
Oh, okay.
Is this your next person here?
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
I have a question during the socialization and decompression study that they did. Did they only practice that in an indoor area, or did they also have like an outdoor area where they could also practice those behaviors as well?
They did that just in the indoor area for two reasons. One, we wanted it to be consistent, and it was a fairly short-term study. I mean, I had a student doing it over spring break.
Yeah.
Right? But also, when the dogs were outside, there were just other distractions and, all that. So that's what we chose the indoor.
I was gonna say too, with that, because some shelters, the one I work with specifically is very small, so they don't necessarily have an indoor space where that could be an option. What are your thoughts about potentially knowing that outdoor can be more distracting, creating a space like that, because it also can work on the calming behaviors of dogs being in a public area, where there are a lot of distractions? Do you think that would be something that is realistically a potential?
Get a tent and a couch from Goodwill.
Got it. Thank you.
That's just off the top of my head, but I think that will, should work. So I can turn the lights up, or Mary Beth, it's a white button right next to the door. Thank you.
I love the tent thing. I forgot about that.
It comes from being a field biologist, right? I spent half my life in tents and sleeping in hammocks. Yes.
Hi. So I don't work in the shelter, but I get contracted to come help with their behavior dogs. And one of the things, like you said, is the resources. And the rescues in my area get way more volunteers than the city shelter does, which is where I help. But I think something like this seems a lot more realistic than some of the behavior plans I could give them that they can't implement. So I'm wondering, is this something that you're going to present to shelters? Are you hoping to spread this information out to them in some way? I can bring this back to them, but it seems like it'd be really useful to get that to some of the resource out.
Yeah, so that's my dream job, but I haven't found anybody who will pay me to do it yet. So I am working on actually looking at writing grants so that I can do that. So that Dr. Owens and I can travel to different shelters and do the training of the volunteers or the staff, and answer their questions directly and things like that. So I would imagine it's probably gonna be grant funded. Anybody from the foundation?
I'm from the foundation.
There you go.
We've
But
had a
also-
record number of people
Collaborate.
apply for grants this year, 30 for like 5.
Well,
So
but
we
that's one of
should
the
bid on the
reasons-
auction.
Yeah, and yes, bid on the auction. And that's one of the reasons why so my first goal is to get this published. Because then I can say, this is published in peer-reviewed literature. We have the statistics, so there have been several conversations over the last 4 years between Mary Beth and I, where she's like, can I say on the website yet? And I'm like, no, not yet. I can't say that yet. We don't have the statistics yet. And she's like, but you showed, but we don't have the statistics yet. You know, because I'm like, trained science in your head, right? Gotta have the P, that's the point of fun. Now we've got it, and so it can go on the website and I can get it published and fingers crossed. Thank you for that encouragement, I appreciate it.
Hey, so we spoke last night a little bit about, and I figured everybody else, we kind of came up with the possibility of an idea. I work for a pet resort, working facility, and maybe having our clients, you know, like every toy that we purchase, from you guys, a portion of that can go towards toys going to the shelters and whatnot. And then once we're trained on how to do it, maybe we go to our local shelter and teach those people. So I don't know if that's something that everybody else here would have.
Yeah, I love that idea. And if we could do something before Christmas, right, I mean, that would be awesome, right? If people could sort of get this for their dog and then gift one to a shelter for Christmas. And I'm sure that we could work out a discounted price for the shelter.
Anything for the puppies, of
and
course,
So,
yeah.
yeah, I really love that idea of doing, okay, you buy one and a percentage of the sales go to getting one for the shelter. The other thing that I wanted to work on is if the shelter uses it with a dog, it goes home with that dog. Right? So it stays, it's labeled, you know. Yes.
I'm coming, hang on.
So I have one question actually about, just in terms of shelter and cleaning, how you were able to keep the same toy with that animal throughout, because a big thing in our shelters is obviously keeping everything clean. So our personal shelter, animals don't have things that stay with them, which sucks. But often it gets covered in poop and it's disgusting and it has to get cleaned.
Right. So basically, I personally kept the toys with me in a Ziploc bag, one of the giant Ziplocs, with their name on it. Their name was on the handle of the toy. I tried to get toys to, like, when a dog would get adopted out, I'd be like, well, here's toy. You know, call the owner and get them their toy. And when the study was over, I left toys behind and said, here's their toys. Yeah, that never worked. They were never used. For that reason, it's just there's too
And
much.
so it didn't stay with them in kennel 24/7. It
No,
was
no, no,
just
because-
while you were doing those play sessions.
And this is also true for your clients, if you use them with your clients, right? So once they're done playing with it, you want to put it away.
Okay.
Because after 2 weeks, like literally on the last day of play, 3 of the dogs broke through. There were walnut shells. But of course it was walnut shells, so who cares? They were out in a sand pit, right? But so if it's left with them, right, they could chew on it and break it open. So you want to trade them,
Okay.
right? Give them something else and put this up. In the shelter, it's like, okay, how are we gonna, I mean, basically, put a hook on the outside of the kennel, hang the toy there, you know, and then, but some of them, y'all, they were so cute. They would just see this hanging on the outside of the play area, and as soon as they got done peeing, they were just like, oh my gosh, give me my toy, give me my toy, give me my toy. So cute. The other thing I wanted to say real quick is if you ever decide to do a study with salivary cortisol, contact me, because there was so much trial and error involved in trying to get enough spit to run the assay, and then figuring out the assay. We used a standard commercial renal assay, which mixing stuff together to measure cortisol. I can explain it if you're interested, but yes, please. it's hard to find in the literature details about methodology like that.
So the other thing, just really quick, was just an idea for getting these into shelters, is I've seen like libraries have done like book club in a box. You know, adding in, maybe start with 5 toys, an instructional booklet, maybe a link to a video online of how to use a toy, you know, basically your presentation too. So it's all ready to go in a box, the shelter can open it up, start learning and doing it. That might be an idea. So you purchase the box for X amount of money, and then you have everything you need in the box to get it started.
And that's a good idea. So there are on the website videos with Dr. Owens demonstrating with her dogs, playing with the toy, but adding a video of using it in the shelter is something that, yeah, we definitely work on. So and I also need to be clear, I do not work for Palmer Dog. I work for the university, and then I started a nonprofit so that I could get money without going to the university. But Palmer Dog did provide the toys and did give a small research grant so that my students could get the things that they needed and everything to do their thesis. Okay, yes.
I plan on buying the toys today, the ones I pointed out last night. But if I buy some for myself, can I buy some for a shelter today?
Oh, absolutely. I'm still working with Edgewater, and so if you buy some for a shelter, you can take them with you and take them to your shelter, or I will take them to Edgewater.
Excellent, thank you.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Got some time.
Thank you, everybody. So we have one more? Time for one more?
1, 2, and you got time.
Okay, all right, awesome.
On the socialization and decompression, how long did each couch session last?
Oh, 20 minutes.
20 minutes. And were they all the male students doing those?